Hello there. I'm Hazel Scott.
Hey friend, welcome to my channel karinealourde, where we deep dive and break down the most iconic stars in history. If you're not yet subscribed, please be sure to do so and turn your notifications on so you never miss an upload. Now let's get into this video. Today we are talking about Hazel Scott, and I've been obsessed with her all my life, as it's always been around music, musicians, and just classical pieces, etc. Everyone around me is basically a musician, so I've been obsessed with music. But one of the musicians that always stuck out to me from old age, just looking up piano pieces and things, I stumbled upon Hazel Scott. I wasn't taught about her in school. I've never heard about her from history classes, which is a shame that these prolific women I had to figure out on my own. And now probably for most of you, this is the first time you heard about her. Comment below if this is your first time you're hearing about Hazel Scott. And she was a big deal. The first video I saw of Hazel Scott was her playing two pianos at once. She's a big deal, but many people just don't know about her. I really want to know, if you did learn about her, comment below. When was the first time you learned about her? Who taught you about her? Was it in school? Was it your parents? Like, how did you come to know about her? Because for me, I had to find her out on my own. Back in 1939, when swing music filled New York City, she was dubbed the darling of cafe society. Hazel Scott, a seductive siren playing raw at the piano, mesmerized listeners with her interpretations of Chopin, Bach, and classical masterpieces. She jazzed up everything, and she has so much swagger. She looks so stunning. She has so much class, so much elegance and eloquence. I was just obsessed with her. The 19-year-old bronze beauty would perform nightly at Cafe Society, the first completely integrated nightclub in New York City, which meant that black and whites could come into, like, it didn't matter where you were from, everyone was invited into the Cafe Society. It was an open place in a time where everything else was segregated. It was the epicenter of jazz and politics, located in Greenwich Village. So Cafe Society, the who's who's were there. The who's who's of everywhere was there. Black, white, Asian, Spanish, it did not matter. And she was the darling of Cafe Society. She was like the Michael Jackson of Cafe Society. And this was a place where just the most educated people showed up. Hazel Dorothy Scott was an American jazz and classical pianist and vocalist of Trinidadian descent. She was a fierce critic of discrimination based on race. As a result of her efforts, African Americans are now more accurately portrayed in movies. This is why I'm so upset that she wasn't taught to me in school. She played a major role, just like that of a Rosa Parks. She was intentional and changed things a lot in the film and music industry for African Americans. She was the first black woman to have her own show. She was the Oprah before there was Oprah, okay? She was the first to have her own show, and it was super successful at that. She used her fame so responsibly and deserves to be a household name. So from this day forward, I want you guys to make Hazel a household name. If you got kids, teach them about Hazel, share this video, go watch her documentaries, go listen to her music, because she deserves that recognition and she doesn't get it enough, okay? Now let's jump into her childhood. Let me contain my excitement and jump into her childhood. Scott was born in Port of Spain on June 11th, 1920. Hazel Dorothy Dorothy Scott was born to R. Thomas Scott, a West African scholar originally from Liverpool, England. And her mother, Alma Long Scott, was a classically trained pianist and music teacher. The family left Trinidad in 1924 and made their way to Harlem, New York City. After her parents got divorced, unfortunately, Scott moved in with her mom and her grandmother. Scott's musical abilities were on display at a young age, and by the time she was 3, she was playing the piano by ear. At 3 years old, Scott would scream her disapproval whenever one of her mother's music students played a wrong note. One day, young Hazel found her way to the piano and started playing the church hymn, Gentle Jesus, which her grandmother, Margaret, used to sing to her every day during naps. Alma, her mother, then decided to dedicate herself to developing her daughter's natural ability rather than continuing to pursue her own goals of becoming a concert pianist, because her mother was a genius also in the music world. Hazel showed her abilities without her mom teaching her a word, and so she sacrificed her own fame, her own success for her daughter, but not in the stage mom type of way. It was very healthy. When your kids have natural abilities, support them, pour into them, and help them develop their skills. Hazel Scott's mom made a living as a musician by performing in a number of female-fronted bands. So she taught herself to play the saxophone also, her mother. Scott and her mother had an amazing relationship, and Scott has said that her mother was the single biggest influence in her life. As a result of Alma's relationship with well-known Afro-American musicians like Art Tatum, Lester Young, and Fats Waller, Hazel was able to study with some of the greatest musicians of all time because of her mother's connections. So her mother was very connected, and people would come to her house that were the who's who's also. So that was good for her. She was a child prodigy pianist because her mother helped her develop her skills and train her from an early age. The next time Professor Paul Wagner of the Juilliard School of Music saw Hazel Scott, she was 8 years old, and he accepted her as his own student after hearing her play. He's like, I want to teach you personally. And in 1933, her mother formed Alma Long Scott's an all-girl jazz band in which Alma Long Scott herself played piano and trumpet, and Hazel was just around that influence nonstop. By the age of 16, Hazel Scott regularly performed for radio programs for the Mutual Broadcasting System, gaining a reputation as the hot classist. While still in high school, Hazel hosted her own radio show on WOR after winning a local competition and performed gigs at night. At times, she felt burdened by the demands of her talent, admitting, there were times when I thought that I just couldn't go on. Still, she managed to graduate with honors from Wadley High. So she graduated honors. Her talent was so much. She was getting gigs left and right, her own radio show. I'm telling you, she was a big deal. And it became overwhelming. The perfectionist that she was and the ambitious young lady that she was managed to graduate high school with honors. In the mid-1930s, she also performed at the Rosedale Dance Hall with the Count Basie Orchestra. Her early musical theater appearance in New York included the Cotton Club Rêve of 1938, Sing Out the News, and The Priorities of 1942. Scott was a nightclub performer throughout the 1930s and 1940s who showcased a wide range of musical styles, including jazz, blues, ballads, Broadway, boogie woogie, and classical. From 1939 to 1943, she was a regular feature at the Countdown and Uptown locations of Cafe Society, thanks to owner Barney Josephson's wisdom in creating a platform for artists of all backgrounds to showcase their talents. So kudos to Barney Josephson's. If you guys want to break down on him, he was the owner of Cafe Society. Comment below. Her concerts would bring widespread attention to the genre of swinging the classics. She popularized the jazz music industry a lot, especially within the Black community. Scott's salary had increased to $75,000 by 1945, which is equivalent to $1,129,000 a year. That's how much she was making a year. She was making $75,000 annually, which is equivalent to $1.1 million a year. Okay, that is major for an African American woman, especially from just music alone in that era. Let's take a moment to just clap, please. Scott was one of the first Black women to be given leading roles in major Hollywood films alongside Lena Horne. She worked with Lena Horne a lot. I did a breakdown for Lena Horne. Also, icon. Please check that out. Check out my playlist on the vintage Black Hollywood starlets. I have playlists for different groups that I do breakdowns here for, but I have all of these wonderful women on there that you may not have known about that you need to know also. So check out that playlist. She turned down the first 4 Hollywood roles she was offered because she refused to play a singing maid. She was a newcomer to the Hollywood scene, and she insisted on having the final say over her physical appearance. She co-starred with Lena Horne in the films The Heats on Something to Shout About and Rhapsody in Blue, as well as starred in the films I Doed It and Broadway Rhythm as herself. She wore her own clothes and jewelry. Yes, every time you see her performing, that was her own clothes and jewelry. Every time she's in a movie, that's her own clothes and jewelry. She would do her glam. She had style, okay? And she insisted on being credited as Miss Hazel Scott as herself for each of her 5 Hollywood film roles. She only played herself. She never played any role. That was in her contract. She did not want to act. She just wanted to make her performance playing as herself, which is legendary. Besides making movies in the 1940s, she also performed at Carnegie Hall in 1941, which is a big deal, in 1943 as part of the Cafe Society from Bach to Boogie Woogie concerts. When her show, The Hazel Scott Show, debuted on the Dumont Television Network on July 3rd, 1950, she made history as the first American of African descent to host her own talk show on American television. Another clap, please. Thank you. Hazel Scott has a neat little show in the modest package, said Variety, calling Scott the most engaging element of the production. Due to its immense success, the show was soon broadcast 3 times a week. Amazing. Scott was a longtime advocate for equal rights. Scott, while on tour, flatly refused to play in any segregated venues. When she saw that Black and white customers were segregated, she refused to perform, and the Texas Ranger had to physically remove her from the city of Austin because she created so much controversy from her refusals to perform. She questioned in Time magazine, saying, "Why would anyone come to hear me, a Negro, and refuse to sit beside someone just like me?" After being refused service at a restaurant in Pasco, Washington in 1949 because they were Negroes, Scott filed a lawsuit against the restaurant's owners. Scott's victory encouraged civil rights organizations to pressure the Washington state legislature to enact the Public Accommodations Act in 1953, which helped African Americans fight against discrimination and public accommodation in Spokane. So do you see why we should know about this legendary woman? She was making laws happen, okay? While starring in The Hearts On during the scene where Hazel played a World War II sergeant, Hazel was angered by the dirty apron costumes she was given to wear for the movie. Also, the women that were sending their husbands off to war, that was the scene in the movie. There were Black women, and the director just had them wearing these dirty outfits to send their husbands off. Hazel went to the director and told him straight up, no Black woman would send their husbands off to war and their sons off to war wearing dirty clothes. And he was like, it's none of your concern what people are wearing. Like, just play your music and worry about yourself. So that pissed off Hazel. So she staged a strike for 3 days until the studio removed the apron from the scene. They eventually gave in because they needed her for the scene because she had clout and they needed the actors to, you know, do their scenes. But the actors, the Black actors, stood in solidarity with Hazel, and there was just so much unity back then. I just love it. And from then on forward, more studios, more actors started making more advancement towards refusing to wear certain things or talk certain way in film. They started fighting back. This is why if you watch my Mammy video with Hattie McDaniel, if you haven't seen it, go see it. Why so many Black actors were so upset with Hattie McDaniel. They took her Oscar and destroyed it, in my opinion. I don't know. But it was because so many were doing things like Hazel, and so many people of that time were missing out on roles, opportunities, etc. for the greater good of everyone else. People were, you know, taking it on the chin, sacrificing. Look at Francine Everett. I did a breakdown for her too. And Sheila Guys. They sacrificed being broke and going through it for the greater good of the people, for us today to have, you know, movies like A Wakanda Forever, you know, things like that. And to see Hattie McDaniel just refused to kind of do the same, kind of pissed off people. So that's where that comes from. When Scott moved back to New York City from Los Angeles, she began an affair with the Harlem preacher and politician Adam Clayton Powell Jr. by winning a congressional seat in New York in 1944. So Powell made history as the state's first African-American lawmaker. Powell aggressively sought her. He was chasing her despite being married, okay? He was married, and he was 12 years older than her, and he was a known womanizer, okay? He had side pieces all over, but he initially made her feel irritated and annoyed by pursuing her so aggressively. He just had to have her. She was the hottest thing on the block. But ultimately, her frustration did turn to genuine feelings of love. They began to sneak around and have an affair privately, and the affair didn't last long because Scott and Powell married the following summer. Too much publicity and scandal because he had divorced his first wife only a few days before they got married. The glamorous couple was the subject of intense media. She was the epitome of cafe society's sexy socialites, which was a big deal, and he made history as the first African-American congressman from the East. They were celebrities in both the black and white worlds, and journalist Mike Wallace remarked at the time that it was extraordinary to see just these black people be celebrities in both sectors. That wasn't happening that much during that time. In 1946, Scott gave birth to a son they named Adam Clayton Powell III. Hazel put her career on hold to focus on her role as a political wife and mother to her and her husband's only child as they established themselves in upstate New York. And at Powell's insistence, she stopped performing in nightclubs, and while he was in Washington, she went on a concert tour. So she did slow down her career a little bit while being with him. There is a little bit of controversy, so gird your loins as we get into this. During the United States Red Scare of communism, and what the Red Scare was it was after World War II. Everybody was afraid, do your research on that because YouTube is sensitive with some of these words, but it was like, if you had any sympathy towards, communist parties, and, everybody was traumatized from World War II basically, and they didn't want a resurgence, another war, because they finished World War I, then World War II. So everyone was like suspicious. Was there spies here, this, that? So it was called the Red Scare. So notable entertainers in the industry were blacklisted, including Hazel Scott, because of her association with Cafe Society, which was a suspected place where communists would gather. And her civil rights efforts made her a target of the House Un-American Activities Committee. So back in those days, because things were still so racially hard and discrimination, that anyone who was fighting civil rights movements were considered a danger to American values also. They didn't want to change things. They kind of wanted to keep things segregated. So you were like Eartha Kitt. I did a video for her. She was wiretapped and followed the CIA and stuff too. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all these people, this was happening before their time. Even before Martin Luther King, anyone who was making advancements for colored people of that time were a target also. And Cafe Society didn't just have colored people and was pushing for their advancement, because Cafe Society essentially made Hazel Scott popular to this degree, but they also was hosting people of different class, of different racial and national origins, people from different countries. So Cafe Society was a target, okay? And because she was the darling of Cafe Society, she was their prime target. Scott volunteered to appear before the House of the Un-American Activities Committee. She denied having any knowledge of the political leanings of the group they claimed she had performed for, because she had never heard of all of them but one. She acknowledged that she had supported a communist candidate for New York City Council years earlier, but declared she was never a party member. After hours of interrogative questioning, her final statement was, and I quote, "May I end with one request, and that is that your committee protect those Americans who have honestly, wholesomely, and unselfishly tried to perfect this country and make the guarantees in our Constitution live. The actors, musicians, artists, composers, and all of the men and women of the arts are eager and anxious to help, to serve. Our country needs us more today than ever before. We should not be written off by the vicious slander of little and petty men." End quote. Yes, she called them petty. Yes. The entertainment and media industries loved her for this. Everybody supported her because it was black, white. Everyone was under this Red Scare, right? I've done many video breakdowns for vintage starlets of Hollywood. You will see that they were all black and white, so it didn't matter. So they was kind of happy that she spoke up for them, but the government was pissed. They were upset. They continue to view her as a potential danger, and they, you know, rejected her whole speech. A week after her statements, the Hazel Scott show got canceled. Yes, they blacklisted her. Scott suffered a nervous breakdown in 1951 due to this. Scott's short-lived television show provided a glimmer of hope for African American viewers. During a time of continued racial bias in the broadcasting industry and economic hardships for jazz musicians in general, this was a show that showed a Black woman playing her classical pieces in elegant gowns and, you know, beautiful hairdos and makeup, and just, she wasn't a mammy, she wasn't doing anything crazy or stereotypical. This was just a beacon of hope, and Black and whites alike loved her for that and loved her show and supported her. So for them to just, like, you know, it was pretty hard on her. So she suffered that nervous breakdown. And it was around this time that her marriage to Powell began to fall apart due to her busy work schedule, long periods of separation, competition, jealousy, and infidelity. You know, she had all this clout, all this fame, always making headlines, and he was a powerful man too. So he didn't like too much playing the second fiddle, according to many documentaries I watched on her, but who knows. They were married for 11 years until they finally decided to divorce. Scott and Powell divorced in 1960 after splitting up in the mid-1950s, and in 1957 she uprooted her life and joined the Black diaspora in Paris. Her home quickly became a hub for talented African American musicians and artists who were living in Paris, like, you know, the Josephine Bakers, all of those things. So during this time, Scott was briefly married to Swiss-Italian comedian Hazel Badin. The year 1967 marked Scott's return to the United States. By this time, though, when she returned to the United States, the civil rights movement had resulted in federal legislation outlawing racial segregation in housing and public places, protecting all citizens, ability to vote, and other social advancements. So things got better by 67, but by then, she had already passed the height of her fame. Jazz music was not it anymore. Jazz and blues were no longer popular. Instead, it was Motown and British pop. Scott continued to play to her fan base in intimate settings, smaller settings, releasing a handful of recordings and even appearing in bit parts on daytime dramas. And 2 months after her last performance on October 2nd, 1981, Scott died of pancreatic cancer. She was only 61 years young. That is very young. Oh my goodness. But she lived such an amazing life. She did so much, accomplished so much, been so many places that, you know, she just lived a life that showed that she was here. She lived a great life. This is an iconic woman, overwhelmingly iconic. She deserves her flowers and deserves to be a household name. If you're not too familiar with her music, I encourage you to go look her up on YouTube. Put some of her music on your playlist when you're doing your nighttime routine, you know, play her music in the background. I love her. She sings also. I love Hazel Scott. I love listening to her play, and I really think you guys will enjoy her music. If you like the music you're listening to in the background, the link is in the description. Support my brother also. Comment below who else would you guys like to see. What are your thoughts? Don't forget to share this video. I love you guys so much. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.